credible information on the issue. So I guess the deal here, Peter, is vaping the lesser of two evils in your view?
Oh, I would have thought so. That said, sometimes you're walking down the street and you get those clouds of sweet-smelling smoke that just come out and bail out somebody's car door. But I do know that...
I hate it. I hate them.
My brother, for example, is giving up, and so he's using it.
I get that. But I don't want to, smell them. I don't want to smell them. I don't want to, it's coming out of their mouth and into
you. And you're sucking it into your lungs.
Yes.
It's very disgusting.
And like I said, I do a lot of walking in the city, and it's just... And I work near K Road, and it's like a vape central, and it's clouds. And what does that smell? How is that good?
Well, what it is, it's cinnamon strawberry. It's
disgusting.
Nice. It's a nice, pleasant
there's
smell.
All sorts of smells. I think they've all got different tastes and flavours, haven't they?
Which is great.
But people that smoke a cigarette do not generate such plumes of the smoke, do they?
Yes, but the fumes from a cigarette will stain your clothes forever. Whereas the cinnamon strawberry...
Not anymore, but you don't go to anywhere where people are actively smoking like that, right, anymore? It's not like going to a bar now.
Sure.
You know.
I don't know. There was some scaremongering a couple of weeks back where people were saying that vaping is worse for you than smoking. I don't know the facts about that at all, but
the studies will come out.
The accredited wisdom, the received wisdom is that vaping is about 5% the harm of smoking. So my question...
That's pretty good.
Yes, exactly. So my question is, shouldn't we be supporting vaping as an alternative, like the nicotine patch?
Can I just ask, if you put you can put nicotine salts or something in that, is that the same then as cigarette? I mean, obviously it's not as bad, there's not other toxins, but there's still nicotine in there.
Yeah, but nicotine, I suppose, is just...
Is that okay?
Well...
It's addictive,
They say that it increases synaptic activity, so it's actually good for thought, believe it or not.
Yes, and it doesn't have the arsenic, it doesn't have the carcinogens, it doesn't have the formaldehyde.
And it doesn't have the tar.
Just don't blow it out into the whole general...
It doesn't have the many hundreds...
Of course, poisonous chemicals.
Literally poisonous chemicals that make up a cigarette.
I get that, but why do I need to breathe it?
No, just stay in your car, wind your windows up.
Yeah.
You obviously haven't...
While you're listening to Ulysses
You haven't smelt the right sort of vaping. There's some delicious smells out there.
They're sickly sweet. They're really
No, I'm with Ruani. I find them kind of odious.
Yeah. Odious, that's a great word. Why should I be breathing what's coming out of your mouth?
Well, we are anyway. It's just you get to see it with the vaping. Big clouds.
It's very true.
Briefly, in terms of the price, cigarettes, of course, have been going up price 10% a year on year for the past several years. Now a pack of 20 will cost you around $30. Just 10 years ago, $9. But there has been a significant drop-off in that time. What do you make? Where do you stand on the extraordinary price of cigarettes?
Well, I think it's a good thing for people that, for the middle class. But when the people are most vulnerable, unfortunately, that's their thing, If, people see homeless people and they're like, they were having a cigarette. I don't see a problem with that. If that is their thing that gives them a little bit of pleasure, luxurious pleasure, and so I think obviously the money for them...
The unseen danger with putting the price up continually is that you end up with a treasure in a dairy. And a lot of people are being attacked for that stuff because they're basically going to rip off the cigarettes. And a lot of those, dairies and gas stations were saying we're not going to stock them anymore, principally because of that reason. That actually
You've been a great panel. Someone says, hair to the cinnamon strawberry. Peter, Elliot, Rawani Parada, you have been fantastic of a Monday. Thank you very much. Checkpoint next. I'm Wallace Chapman.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, wine and chauffeur-driven cars cost the ANZ bank boss his $3 million a year job. So is he paying any of the so-called business expenses back? Well, that would be a no. Would you believe cat poo is the biggest threat to dolphins, not fishing nets? We have the details. And who should get paid more, a senior teacher at a big school or the principal of a small one? While some say the latest teacher's pay offer is a kick in the guts. Right now, are you behind the wheel of a death trap? Calls to ban unsafe older imported cars rev up, and passionate Tongan League fans meet their heroes at Mount Smart Stadium ahead of Saturday's clash against the Kiwis.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The shock departure of the chief executive of the country's biggest bank is being linked to major changes afoot in the Australian banking sector, following a scathing Royal Commission report. David Hisco is departing ANZ following a dispute with the board over expenses amounting to tens of thousands of dollars for chauffeur-driven cars and wine storage. The director of Massey University Business School, Claire Matthews, says given Australia's Royal Commission report, Australian-owned banks in New Zealand are clearly taking a much tighter line than previously and closely watching everything they do. The chair of ANZ, John Key, has declined to say whether David Hisco resigned or was fired, describing his departure only as a mutual parting of the ways. Sir John Key says Mr Hisco doesn't accept the bank's position about the expenses and it's not asking him to repay them.
The wine storage was in Australia. The cars were primarily in New Zealand. But he believes he had authority to do that. We accept that. But what we don't accept is the way they were recorded in our accounts.
Sir John Key. The Prime Minister says there are expectations of a certain standard of conduct from senior leaders, whether it's in the public or private sector. At her post-Cabinet media conference a short time ago, however, Jacinda Ardern was reluctant to comment specifically on Mr Hisco's situation.
Obviously, this is an employment matter. It's a matter for ANZ. I was advised of the situation and the decision this morning. But again, as I say, it's really ultimately a matter for ANZ and an employment matter.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The government is proposing a new scheme to help farmers in financial distress deal with their lenders. Under a new bill, creditors, including banks, will be required to offer mediation before putting farms into receivership or liquidation. The New Zealand First MP, Mark Patterson, pushed for the law change last year, but legislation setting up the scheme has now been proposed by the government. The Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, says farm failure can have a ripple effect through regional economies. He says the bill offers early intervention, which is a far better option than foreclosure. Primary school principals say the government's latest pay offer is a kick in the guts. They say the principals of small schools would wind up being paid less than many senior teachers. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, reports.
The government is offering the principals of small schools enough to take the starting salary for running a school of 50 children to just over $95,000 by 2021. Principals say that's not enough because senior teachers are being offered a top pay rate of $90,000, and with payment for extra responsibility they can easily earn more than a principal. The Educational Institute says relativity between principals of small schools and senior staff in big schools is a long-standing issue, but it will be up to its members to approve or reject the offer. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The country's spy watchdog has discovered more than 100,000 emails it asked for months ago to help its inquiry into controversial New Zealand military operations in Afghanistan. Last October, the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Cheryl Gwynne, asked the SIS and GCSB for access to the mailboxes of certain staff. In January, she got access to tens of thousands of emails, but her staff then found a further 115,000 had not been provided by the GCSB. Ms Gwynne, whose inquiry is running alongside the government's Operation Burnham one, says accessing such emails is crucial to her inquiry. A stalwart of Wairarapa cricket was one of the two people killed in an air accident on the outskirts of Masterton yesterday. Craig McBride died instantly when the plane he was piloting collided with another light aircraft near Hood Aerodrome. Jonathan Mitchell is in Masterton.
Wairarapa Cricket's operations manager Simon Rosengrave says Mr McBride had volunteered with the organisation for decades and was passionate about the game. He says the local cricket fraternity is shocked and saddened by the death. Part of the cordon around the two wrecks was lifted this afternoon, but the names of the victims are yet to be officially released. The police, the Civil Aviation Authority and the Transport Accident Investigation Commission have been at the scene all day. In Masterton, ko Jonathan Mitchell, tēnei.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has unveiled a new Golan Heights settlement named after Donald Trump. 3 months ago, the US became the first country to recognise Israeli sovereignty over the Syrian territory that Israel has occupied since 1981. At a ceremony to open Trump Heights, the US ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, said the name will bring life to the region.
It's a wonderful first step in the follow-on to his recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which I'm very proud of. I think many in the United States think it was a brilliant decision, and we're going to give some effect to it and life to it today.
David Friedman, Mr Trump, has responded on Twitter thanking Mr Netanyahu and saying it's a great honour. It's 5:05. The American golfer Gary Woodland has won his first major championship, the US Open at Pebble Beach. He drained a 7.5-metre birdie putt on the final hole to finish the tournament 13 under. The defending champion, Brooks Koepka, was second, 3 shots back at 10 under. Woodland went into the final round with a 2-shot lead, but never allowed himself to think he'd seal his first major.
Never let myself believe that it was over with. Even walking up to last, even before I hit that last putt, just kept telling myself it's not over. You got to finish, and it was nice that putt went in. I'm glad it's over with.
Gary Woodland. The NBA star Steven Adams has ruled himself out of New Zealand's Basketball World Cup campaign, continuing a mysterious career-long stance of being unavailable for the Tall Blacks. His management group has released a statement saying the Oklahoma City Thunder centre won't be part of the tournament in China in September. Adams has never been available for international duty and has never fully explained why. The Wellington Phoenix Football Club have taken a gamble in signing a replacement for veteran defender and long-time captain Andrew Durante. They've signed Brisbane Roar defender Luke De Vere on a 1-year deal. The 29-year-old De Vere has been dogged by knee problems in recent years, managing just 5 games last season. And the New Zealand shot putter Tom Walsh has thrown a season best at 22.18 metres in winning an event in Poland. That's the news.
A disaster in the air.
My cousin saw them in the air too close, and then we saw them collide.
Do we have a stolen generation?
Alarm bells should be going off throughout New Zealand when that term, coined in Australia with a different legislative setting, is being applied here.
And is free speech a winner for ACT?
That fringe group who have those kinds of detestable views, I don't actually want them to. If they're listening, which they probably don't, get up and listen to Morning Report. I can tell them now, don't bother voting for us.
Get up and listen. Morning Report with Corin Dann and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the incredible tale of the Vietnam War's Operation Baby Lift. And after 10, environment writer Amanda Little on what we'll be eating in a hotter, drier, more crowded world. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
The forecast from Metsuvis to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula, Western Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Some showers. For the remainder of Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy at times, isolated afternoon showers in Bay of Plenty. Wairarapa and Horowhenua through to Wellington, mainly fine, isolated showers about Wairarapa this evening. Nelson and Marlborough, fine weather. Canterbury, cloudy at times. A few showers for Banks Peninsula with snow to 700 metres. Bulla and Westland, showers clearing south of Hokitika and elsewhere. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, showers, some heavy with hail and thunderstorms possible near the coast. Snow to 400 metres, gradually lifting this evening and showers easing. Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy, could be thundery with hail. You're with RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The head of the country's biggest bank has left under a cloud after an internal investigation found discrepancies in his expense claims running into the tens of thousands of dollars. Last month, ANZ said that David Hisco was taking extended leave for health reasons. But this morning, the bank claimed Mr Hisco had characterised chauffeured cars and storage as business expenses when they were in fact personal expenses. It says the former CEO has left of his own accord and doesn't have to pay the money back, but he has forfeited his rights to about $6.4 million worth of shares. I asked ANZ Board Chair Sir John Key exactly when he found out there was a problem.
Approximately 3 months ago, there was a internal review, if you like, of executive expenses held by the CEO of ANZ Bank, and David was part of his leadership team. he reviewed a number of executives, and as part of that, it threw up what could be some concerns. At that point, we didn't know exactly what they were, whether there was a good explanation. We just knew that it was throwing out some red flags, and he immediately informed me, and then Group Integrity started looking at the issue, and that took some time to get all the relevant information.
Well, so you've known for 3 months, and obviously he announced that he was going on leave for health reasons in May. Were those two things connected at the time? His departure for health reasons, were they connected to the investigation into his expenses?
No, although I'd suspect, his health reasons you'd have to take up with him because they're obviously a private matter, but they're genuine. But I'd say the pressure of this situation would have added to stress he would have been feeling, but no, they're separate issues.
Okay, so what exactly is the problem with his expenses?
Yeah, okay, so essentially he believes, and we accept, that he had authority for using some expenses which arguably he would argue as business, but actually they were personal expenses, primarily in the use of chauffeur-driven cars. So he believed he had authority from the then CEO to do that, but it was oral, so it's very difficult to sort of prove or disprove. So we've accepted that he had that authority.
So what was he using the car for exactly? Was he going to business meetings or?
No, for private things, of a private nature. And then basically the issue here is not that, because, he may well have the approval, and we accept his word that he did. The problem was that the way that they were recorded in our books, because they are what's called a direct chargeback, there was either no transparency, they were bulked up, or they were characterised as business when they're clearly of a private nature.
So are you saying that he was hiding the use of the car for private purposes?
Well, what I'd say is that...
Or disguising it?
Well, they weren't characterised correctly, and he has an explanation for that.
How were they characterised? Sorry, before we move on, how were they characterised?
Well, of a business nature.
And it wasn't just the chauffeur, though, was it? What else was it?
Look, that was the primary thing. There was a bit of wine storage in Australia because he came over as an expat. So,
what do you mean by a bit of wine storage? What does that mean?
Well, if you are an executive, for instance, that lives in Australia or New Zealand, for want of an argument, and you take a job across the Tasman and you want to take your wine and you have to pay duty on that, because he was coming as an expat for a temporary period of time, he didn't want to bring his wine over because he would have had to pay excessive amounts of duty. So he just said, look, I'll leave that in Australia.
But he was charging it to the bank?
The storage costs, and we think that's outside of the agreement that he had.
You say that you accept that he had oral authority to do this, so why is he going then if he had permission?
Yeah, because it's not about the actual use of the money, it's about the transparency of the way they're recorded in our book. So if we...
So his deceit, his alleged deceit then?
Well, what I would say in another way is to say that it's really important that we treat everyone fairly and equally in the organisation, irrelevant of whether they are the chief executive or a freshly minted teller that comes into the bank on day one. And so what we expect people to do is be clear and transparent with us. And in this case, there are things that are recorded effectively in his records, if you like, as for one purpose when they're really for another. Now, he had
but that explanation, Sir John, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that explanation from you suggests it was willful deceit. Is that what you are saying it is?
Well, what I'm saying is it wasn't recorded for accurately. And
why the reluctance to call it what it is? Why don't you just tell me exactly whether it was willful deceit or not?
Well, they're your words, not mine, and I'm not going to put words in my mouth.
No, but it's one of two things, isn't it? It's either a mistake or it's on purpose. So which is it?
Well, the lack of transparency is clear. It was clear that he chose to characterise it in that way. That they were bulked up, and
so how much is this all worth? How much is it all worth?
Well, Yeah, okay, it's tens of thousands of dollars over, a period that looks like it runs for the entire time he was CEO.
So when you say tens of thousands, are we talking high tens of thousands or low
Probably
tens?
mid, I'd say.
Okay, so in the scheme of things, well, relatively small fry when you're talking about a man who earns more than $3 million a year and did up until a short time ago have, $6.5 million worth of shares?
Well, the unvested stock and performance rights. Yes, that's right. Yep, and that's a line of reasoning you could run. But then on the other side of the coin, firstly, David, when we first raised this issue with him, was of the view that the appropriate thing would be for him to leave the bank, and that was an agreement we reached as well. So it was mutually agreed. So
was that what he thought, or did you give him an ultimatum?
No, that's what he thought.
So you're saying of his own accord he volunteered to go. He wasn't pushed, pressured, or asked.
Correct. Now, we happen to agree with that opinion and all of those things, but ultimately he took the view that, if you stood back and really reflected on it, he has set high standards for the bank. He's actually been an outstanding chief executive. He's done a great job over the last 9 years, but he's had a blind spot in regard to this area. And we, in the end, if we had a more junior person in the organisation who did this, we would also part ways.
Okay,
and I do get. How can we be consistent?
I get that, the point you're making, but I'm wondering, did the terms of his departure agreement with you prevent you from calling this exactly what it is?
No. I think we've been incredibly clear and transparent with everyone, with our staff, with the shareholders, with
You've known about it for
media.
3 months, though, haven't you?
No. What we've known is that there was an issue 3 months ago that needed further investigation.
And you're calling it a blind spot. You're calling it a blind spot.
Yeah, well, I think in the end, this isn't a matter of whether he could have spent the money. I mean, this is a guy who came to New Zealand as an expat with lots of expat allowances, and at the end of it all, he decided that and believed he had authority for this kind of expenditure. And
do you believe he had authority for it? You personally, do you believe he had authority for this?
Well, I'm happy to accept David at his word. He's been very trustworthy and everything else.
He's been trustworthy, has he?
Yeah, but the problem
even
is
though
that
he seemingly misrepresented his expenditure, he's been trustworthy.
Oh, yes, and it's worth remembering that over the period of time, there's been lots of reviews in different areas, and this was a chargeback of a particular amount, but he has lots of other expenses, and they're regularly reviewed, and they've all been found to be fully accurate.
As a consequence of this, are you looking more widely into other transactions he may have been involved in or other practices he has, given that you've found this blind spot? There might be other blind spots.
Well, that review work of his expenses was done at the time because it was done with everyone, and they were found to be all in order.
Are you looking at any other?
In relation to this?
Are you looking any wider than this? So there's nothing that you're not telling us at the moment?
No, there's nothing we're not telling you.
Okay. When you say that, this is about, it's about values, basically, you're telling me, and that you would expect a standard of behaviour from the most junior staff member, and everybody needs to be held to the same standards. Correct? Okay. So when the Reserve Bank censured the ANZ recently for your persistent failure in its capital controls, why did the board not take responsibility for that in the same way that David Hisco appears to be here? Why didn't you leave over that?
Yeah, so firstly, they haven't been persistent. It was in relation to the operational risk capital, and I think it's worth remembering that the bank runs about 45 different models. Pretty much all the banks, I think, that have run these models have had issues of varying different degrees.
You are the only bank who currently has had that right taken away from you, are you not, in New Zealand? You're the only one who's lost the right to calculate your own capital risk, yep?
I don't think that is right. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, Westpac had 17 of these.
Currently, now, I mean, Sir John.
Well,
right at the moment.
Well,
So-
that's like saying I'm the only person that might have got a parking ticket this morning and other people got them yesterday, but they
Bit
don't
bigger
count.
than a
So-
parking ticket, though, Sir John? Bigger than a parking ticket.
I think it's, well, not really. I think it's worth remembering this, okay, which is that, yes, we take absolute responsibility, and the way that that responsibility manifests itself is that we have an attestation process, which means the directors attest that the models are compliant. And in that regard,
I'm
not
asking you a
knowingly-
question, though, about personal responsibility. So a core mistake has been made within the bank. You are the boss on the board. Why are you still there?
Well, because there wouldn't be an expectation from, I think, very many people that you would actually step down over that.
Okay, so that's the way the chair of the ANZ board, Sir John Key, sees it. Checkpoint has tried unsuccessfully to get in contact with David Hisco. But according to the ANZ's media release, Mr Hisco does not accept all of the concerns raised by the board, but he accepts accountability given his leadership position and agrees the characterisation of the expenses falls short of the standards required. Now, Mr Hisco will be paid out 12 months' notice, and previous bank reports show his remuneration is in excess of $3 million a year. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm sure you'll have something to say on this. What do you make of David Hisco's departure? He doesn't have to pay back any of the money involved in those expenses. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Power is slowly being restored in Argentina and Uruguay after tens of millions of people were left in the dark by an unprecedented blackout. Parts of Brazil and Paraguay were also affected by the massive outage, and an investigation is underway. It's suspected a power grid centred on Argentina's Salto Grande Dam could be to blame. With more, here's the BBC's Chris Buckler.
At first light, much of South America was left in darkness. A massive power outage left tens of millions of people without electricity and crippled communications in city after city. In Argentina, people were preparing to go to the polls, but with trains halted by the power cut and all the traffic lights out in the streets, several provinces took the decision to temporarily delay local elections. This was a failure on a quite remarkable scale.
A 25-minute trip took me almost an hour and a half to be completed. And during the journey, I saw 3 collisions.
The collapse of Argentina's national grid caused a blackout that stretched not just across this country, but throughout Uruguay and even into some parts of Brazil and Paraguay. Businesses were left scrambling to fire up generators in an effort to save their stock.
We don't know much. What I read was on Facebook where it said the problem came from Argentina. But the truth is, we really don't know a lot.
Energy companies have been struggling to determine the cause of these unprecedented problems. Slowly throughout the day, customers have been reconnected. But by early evening, that still left half of Argentina without electricity and preparing for what could be a long, dark night.
Chris Buckler in Buenos Aires. Wairarapa's cricketing community is mourning the loss of one of its most active volunteers following yesterday's mid-air plane crash near Masterton. Craig McBride died when the plane he was piloting collided with another light aircraft on final approach to Hood Aerodrome. The pilot of the other plane also died at the scene. Today, investigators were on site to assess the wreckage of both aircraft. Our reporter, Jonathan Mitchell, was there.
We're standing at the crash site where yesterday 2 light planes crashed in midair and landed behind me here. It was a day similar to this. It was fine, there was little wind. The community is still in shock. The Mayor, Lynn Patterson, says she's been fielding many calls all day.
I'm fielding a lot of calls from members of our community, receiving a lot of emails and Facebook messages that people particularly from the community, but also that lived here and have moved away, just saying, hey, we feel for our community back in Masterton. So it's a tough time for everyone. I offer my condolences to the family and friends of the 2 victims of the tragedy yesterday, and I know this community, and this community will get behind and support those families. I think as mayors, this is our role is to show and speak on behalf of our community, and we all feel it. We all have family as well, and so we all feel that there is the huge human dimension to it as well. So it's a tragic day.
Because it was a day like this, wasn't it? The sun was shining.
Yes. Beautiful day down at Hori Aerodrome. It's a wonderful, wonderful sight, and it's just hard to believe standing down there yesterday that such a tragedy had occurred just an hour or two beforehand.
Were you there? Did you go down there?
I did go. I went down and spent a good part of the afternoon down there with and to show my support to the people at the aerodrome that were directly affected.
Must have been hard.
Yes, it was, but I think we needed to be there to show our support in whichever way we could do.
Jonathan, what's been going on there today?
Hi Lisa, well as you can see I'm at a police cordon just a few metres away from the wreckage. It was on a day, as I mentioned earlier, like this where the 2 planes crashed mid-air. The police late this afternoon lifted most of the cordon on Hughes Line, and so now we've got the tape back here. The 2 wreckages are behind me, as we saw earlier. They're just metres apart, and police, Civil Aviation Authority and Transport Accident Investigation Commission staff are on site. They've started their investigation. We understand family members have also been down at the scene today. As you heard from the Mayor, it's a really rough time for the community. A few weeks ago, we had the missing tramper. He was found last week. It's just another blow for the community here.
As you say, the investigation has started, but have the bodies of the pilots been removed from the wrecks? Do we know that?
We understand one body has been removed. That was yesterday. So we're more than 24 hours on. The wreckages are still behind me, and we understand that there is still another body inside one of the light planes. As I mentioned, it's still unknown when the wreckages will be taken away. The investigations have only really got underway, and that may take some time. So the wreckages may be here for a while, and because of the difficulty and the terrain, the other body, it's not known when that person will be taken out officially.
So it's a popular little airstrip there. What is the situation at the moment? Can planes still use it?
We understand the airspace is open, but the Civil Aviation Authority has said that it's up to the individual plane companies, it's up to their discretion whether they want to fly or not. But since we've been here all day, we haven't seen any planes in the airfield or up in the air. So at this point, no planes are flying, but the airfield is open.
And what happens next, do you know?
Well, the investigations are just in the early stages. It could be weeks, months before we hear anything from the Civil Aviation Authority or the Transport Accident Investigation Commission. The police today were meant to be handing the official investigation over to the CAA. That's meant to be formally happening at some point today. But as you can see behind me, a lot of activity, a lot of people here, a lot of investigators in the early stages.
And Jonathan Mitchell there, speaking from near the scene of yesterday's plane crash near Masterton. A Tolaga Bay man whose farm was wrecked in last year's devastating storms, which washed debris and logs onto roads and farmland, is delighted one of the forestry companies has pleaded guilty to causing the damage. Gisborne District Council has prosecuted 10 companies, and this morning one of those changed its plea to guilty. Hikurangi Forest Farms had entered a not guilty plea in March to discharging contaminants into the environment in breach of its resource consent, but at an Environment Court hearing in Auckland this morning, it changed its plea to guilty. Farmer Mike Parker says since the floods on Queen's birthday last year, locals have endured an emotional and testing 12 months trying to get themselves back on their feet. He told our reporter Joanna McKenzie, hearing that one company had admitted guilt is wonderful news.
We now hope the other 9 will follow and that they will recognise the damage that this has had on the community and the financial, environmental and emotional effects on the district, really. Yeah.
It's obviously been a very difficult year and a long journey, but does this news give you some peace?
Yeah, I think it's great. It's great hope, and I think the council have done very, very well to get them up to or into court finally. Yeah, it's been a real battle. They've done a lot of sidestepping, and I think the resource consent is laid out as it is, and these companies haven't been taking any notice of it, and I think they've realised what they've done, and I think everyone's going to be very, very happy. It's a good start, and we've probably got a long way to go yet, and we're definitely, we're wanting compensation for ourselves and the district also. Yeah, we would now expect the GDC to apply for compensation across both public and privately damaged assets. Farm fences, houses have all been flooded through, and then you've got bridges, beaches, especially beaches, the rivers.
So do you feel that this gives you a bit of a strength in your position to move forward and to really push for that compensation?
Oh, definitely, absolutely, yeah. The good thing is that now that Hikurangi have admitted to wrongdoing, they've now admitted liability, which is good. So it'll be easy for the council because they're under severe pressure to sort things out as well. And there can be a bit of hope, I think, or caring can come back to how we're all being treated, and I think it'll be great.
Tolaga Bay farmer Mike Parker talking to Joanna McKenzie. Hikurangi Forest Farms will be sentenced in Gisborne District Court on the 1st of October, and the remaining 9 forestry companies will reappear in court in a few months' time. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a new advocacy group representing parents in disputes with Oranga Tamariki says it's been inundated with calls for help. Are cats a bigger threat to dolphins than fishing nets? Well, we'll have the details. And who should be paid more, a senior teacher at a big school or the principal of a small school? And we're at Mount Smart Stadium with Tongan fans ahead of this weekend's clash against the Kiwis. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program. Let us know what's on your mind. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or a good old-fashioned email is always good, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to Susanna with the headlines.
The Prime Minister says a certain standard of conduct is expected from senior leaders in both the public and private sector. Jacinda Ardern was commenting on the shock resignation of ANZ head David Hisco following a dispute over his expenses, which included chauffeured cars and wine storage. Earlier, the chair of ANZ, John Key, would not say if the former CEO resigned or was sacked, and said Mr Hisco doesn't accept the bank's position about the expenses. The Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor says a proposed new bill to help struggling farmers doesn't mean they will be able to walk away from their debt if the farm goes under, but it will result in a fairer process. The new scheme would help farmers in financial distress deal with their lenders by requiring creditors to offer mediation before moving on foreclosure. The Inspector General of Intelligence and Security has now found more than 115,000 emails she requested months ago to help with an inquiry into controversial Defence Force operations in Afghanistan. Last October, Cheryl Gwynne asked the SIS and GCSB for access to certain staff mailboxes. She was given access to tens of thousands of emails in January, but her staff then found a further 115,000 had not been provided by the GCSB. The principals of small primary schools are feeling shortchanged by the government's latest pay offers. They say the deals mean they would still earn less than some senior teachers, making it harder than ever to hire principals for small rural schools. The Educational Institute says relativity between rural principals and senior staff in big schools is a long-standing issue. The Mayor of Auckland says an official database will be set up to get a picture of how reliable the Waiheke ferry service is. Phil Goff and council representatives met with Fuller's ferry service this afternoon to address commuters' worries about cancellations and delays. He says Fuller's claims its ferry services are more than 99% reliable, but Waiheke residents disagree. More transparency is needed. Those are the latest headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to business now with Nona Peltier, who's brought all her paperwork with her. She's doing a bit of filing during the news, weren't you, Nona? I feel like you've got lots of things to talk about. Services sector has picked up a bit, but undertone points to, well, slowing. Mixed message then.
It's very much a mixed message. So we've seen some strange movement in numbers since the start of the year, which makes it hard for economists to get a good read on where things are heading. So on one hand, the services sector, this is the activity in the services sector, has picked up. So that's good. But it's the areas where it's picked up that's a bit of a concern. So on one hand, the numbers show expansion, 53.6. So anything above 50 is expansion. That's good. But some of that expansion has been in inventories. So does that mean they're not moving? Things aren't, so new orders are below average. The index itself is below average. But, there's been a big bounce in inventories. That could mean that things aren't moving. So that could be potentially not so good for the economy. And so it's going to take a while for us to see where these numbers end up. And we're going to have some GDP figures later this week, by the way, and that's for the March quarter. There's quite a lag. So we'll see which way the wind has been blowing. We don't exactly know.
The other story you've got here is grape harvest. Now, this is apparently well down on last year. Oh, well, you'll be shocking wine lovers. But the outlook is still good for exports. How does that work?
Well, okay, so they had some really nice weather, super nice weather, but that wasn't very good for the grapes in terms of its harvest. I guess grapes like rough weather, who knows exactly. But anyhow, 10%, almost 10% down the harvest was on last year. So we are expecting less vintage, right? Less wines to sell. However, it doesn't really matter because we're expecting to get quite good prices because the wine is better quality than normal.
Right.
So, warm weather, better quality wines, but fewer grapes. So there you go. However, they're still forecasting a 4% lift in exports. And that winemakers have a lot of inventory. We just mentioned inventory in their, in their cellars. So they expect to be able to meet their own forecasts for growth.
Interesting. I'm sure someone will get us in touch and tell us why the grape harvest is down. 2101 on the text, because Nona and me would like to know exactly why.
It's the weather.
Yeah,
it's the weather.
Specifically. Okay, what about the markets? Let's do a quick whip around. What have you got
for me? All right, so we were down 0.2%. That's our NZX Top 50 Index, 65 points down to 10,170, and that's still uncertainty in the market with so many things going on. The New Zealand dollar was trading at 65.1 against the US, and that's because of the US strength, and 94.6 Australian, and 51.7 British pence. There you go.
Same, but slightly different. Yeah,
always the same, pretty much.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with your business news. And apparently cats, not fishing nets, are by far the biggest threat to dolphins. That is according to a proposed threat management plan released today by Fisheries New Zealand and the Department of Conservation. They estimate that on average 334 nationally vulnerable Hector's dolphins and 2 nationally critical Maui dolphins die from toxoplasmosis every year due to cat faeces making its way into the water. That dwarfs the 58 they estimate die in trawl or set nets. Here's our fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
While cats might be right up there with dolphins on the cuteness scale, a new report says the two are not good bedfellows. Already in the crosshairs of environmentalists over their laying waste to native birds, the danger they pose to dolphins has provided yet another reason to control the cat population. Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage would prefer education to extermination.
And it's ensuring that their faeces don't go into streams and waterways, so cat owners that keep their cats indoors can help, things like riparian planting and better understanding the whole disease.
Fisheries Minister Stuart Nash hinted he'd like to see the nation move away from owning cats altogether.
Cat owners also have to be educated around the disadvantages of cat ownership.
But dolphin expert Professor Liz Slotin is surprised the theory that cats pose a greater risk to dolphins than fishing nets has even seen the light of day, and describes it as a nonsense. She says DOC and Fisheries NZ were warned by a panel of experts ahead of the release of their proposed threat management plan that the danger posed by toxoplasmosis from cat faeces was tenuous at best.
the expert panel told them, don't do this. Put a couple of pages in your report explaining what you know and what you don't know about toxo, but don't go comparing it directly, the numbers of toxo deaths with the number of bycatch deaths. You don't have enough information to pull that off.
Professor Slotin says the plan itself says there are still a lot of uncertainties around this theory and notes that toxoplasmosis is not usually the primary cause of death.
Usually with humans, you either don't notice when you catch it at all, or you notice flu-like symptoms for a few days. And then you are 95 and about to die of natural causes. Then at that sort of a point, the toxoplasma might flare up and it'll be all through you when you die.
Liz Slotin says there's a danger the focus on such a far-out theory will divert attention away from the genuine threat posed by fishing nets. On this issue, the threat management plan doesn't seem to have pleased fishers or environmentalists. The head of Fisheries Inshore New Zealand, Jeremy Helson, says a plan to widen a ban on trawling and set nets in areas where there's a higher risk to Maui and Hector's dolphins will cost his industry hundreds of millions of dollars.
Under the most extreme options, this would wipe out a lot of operators. There'll be hundreds of people that simply won't be able to continue operating in the face of these suggestions that the government's put forward. So you don't just take out the operator, you take out the revenue of people that work for them, people that process their fish.
Jeremy Helson says a ban on set nets in North Island West Coast harbours would see supplies of kahawai, flatfish and mullet dry up.
These are mostly small-scale operators. The risk to dolphins in those areas are vanishingly small in most instances. There's never ever been a sighting of a dolphin in these harbours. So it's, I think, at the extreme end of management to try and eradicate that infinitesimally small risk for that cost.
Liz Slotin says it's good to see an extension of the ban on set nets to cover the entire west coast of the North Island, which may give the Maui dolphin, population 63, a fighting chance. But she says the plan doesn't go nearly far enough when it comes to protecting Hector's dolphins, whose population has dropped by half to an estimated 15,000.
There are several populations, including about 45 dolphins off Otago and about 42 dolphins in Porpoise Bay in the Catlins on the bottom right-hand corner of the South Island, that are in serious trouble. These are tiny populations. There is a lot of set netting and trawling in their habitat.
The proposed threat management plan is out for public consultation until August, with advice due to be given to the Conservation and Fisheries Ministers for a final decision by year's end. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Well, this one's one to listen to if you're on the ride home this evening. A proposal to ban some used car models from being imported into New Zealand is being welcomed by the Motor Industry Association, which says Japan's scraps are being sent here for waste disposal. A report obtained by RNZ shows the government is considering stopping cars with poor safety ratings from entering the country. One of the five most popular used cars imported into the country last year, 3 could be banned. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The proposed ban would affect pre-2016 Suzuki Swifts, the nation's second most popular used car, Toyota Corollas built prior to 2008, and any Mazda Demios, the fourth and fifth most popular used cars respectively. Auckland motorist Ali drives a Nissan Pulsar, which would also no longer be able to be imported. She says she's worried about the safety of her car.
I'm thinking that perhaps I need to go and get it checked. Just this weekend it overheated and was billowing smoke out of it, which may be something to do with, the specific car itself. But, that does concern me, because what if it is actually dangerous?
And she says if things do go wrong, many owners of the unsafe cars aren't in a position to fix them.
A lot of people who would buy these cars are perhaps people who don't have a huge amount of money, so don't have a lot to put into them if something goes wrong.
The Motor Industry Association's Chief Executive David Crawford says imported cars are sometimes up to 14 years old, and stopping them coming in would be a big step to a safer fleet.
It's hard to fathom why we would allow vehicles that are older than half of their economic life to come in. We're just basically facilitating other countries to get rid of their scrap, and we're importing somebody else's waste disposal problem.
But the editor of the Dog and Lemon Car Guide, Clive Matthew Wilson, says while he strongly supports safer vehicles, any import ban needs to be carefully considered.
So it's very, very important that people who are going to, say, drive to a meatworks in a country area where there is no public transport have access to moderately safe vehicles. And, simply banning all vehicles that don't meet a certain crash criteria sounds really good in theory, but if there aren't replacement vehicles available for the people getting rid of their old cars, then the people will simply keep their old cars for longer.
The Automobile Association says it supports the proposal but wants other steps to be taken first, including better public education around the safety ratings that are already in place. Auckland motorist Ali says she also supports such a move.
We have a horrific road toll, and if that has any part of it, we should absolutely be having a safety rating or not importing them.
Banning imports of cars with low safety ratings from entering the fleet is one of several priorities set out by the Vehicle Standards and Certification Reference Group, one of 5 groups advising the government on its new road safety strategy, which will replace Safer Journeys next year. For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
Yeah, so what do you make of that? Are you behind the wheel of a pre-2016 Suzuki Swift, pre-2008 Corolla? I mean, how many of those are there out there? Or any Mazda Demio? Should we scrap them, not bring them into the country? 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And speaking of feedback, we have had tons of it on the interview with Sir John Key regarding ANZ boss David Hisco going. And this is over a kerfuffle over his expenses, specifically private expenses, wine storage and chauffeur-driven vehicles that were recorded as being business expenses. This from Peter. Wine storage? Did this guy not realise we have wine shops in New Zealand, or is it below him to go out and actually purchase it? $3 million a year and he still has to grab a bit more. As an ANZ customer, I am frankly disgusted. And this one says, on that note, Peter, I learned something today about that. Apparently, if he'd brought the wine collection over, he would have had to pay extra duty, etc., so it was better for it to stay where it was, by all accounts. 3 months means he hauled in an extra $1 million before being pushed. Sheesh, some of us don't even earn that in a lifetime, that person says, because Sir John told us that they'd known for about 3 months that there was a problem with the expenses. And Paul has got in contact to say, ANZ, it is this sort of attitude of entitlement despite already earning approximately 40 times the average ANZ employee salary that gives businessmen a bad rap. As a retired such person, I say good on the chair for making an example. Actually, I think Sir John was very clear about the fact that David Hisco resigned and wasn't pushed. And all right, back locally, banks wanting to foreclose on farmers will be forced to head to mediation first under a proposed new law. Farmers owe more than $63 billion, and that is up about 270% on 20 years ago. The Farm Debt Mediation Bill will require creditors to offer farmers who default on payments mediation before they take any enforcement action. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor joins me now. Good evening, Minister. What does this mean in practical terms?
Look, what it does, it just puts in place a scheme. It doesn't necessarily change the outcomes, but it puts in place a scheme that has some disciplines in it. Mediators will be appointed. They can be nominated by the bank, and the farmer can then select which one of 3. And then there'll be some timelines on the process. Because in the past, there's been a huge imbalance of power, and basically when a farmer, through a whole lot of different reasons, it might be an event, it might be a biosecurity issue like M. bovis, as we've seen, it may just be change in circumstances, and in the farmers, they may be cash positive, but the equity may have disappeared and the banks decide that they should, close them down or sell them up. And in a situation like that, the farmer has very little power at all. And this is just designed to bring some balance back in so that there's a negotiation has to take place before any final decisions are made.
So who pays for the mediation service?
They split that, and it may not be a huge cost at all, but it's split.
And so are the decisions binding?
yes, they are binding, and the mediator will then write a report. It comes back through MPI will oversee the process, make sure that the mediators, they will have to be certified, that they have skills, appropriate skills and knowledge. They obviously have to have the trust of both parties, and then they will write a report which will then be binding.
So how often are banks foreclosing on farmers then? Because you obviously see a demand for this service. So what are the numbers?
No, look, to be fair, the banks, I think, have been very reasonable over the years, but there are situations where simply the imbalance of power means it's not unfair. It's certainly
but not everyone's being reasonable, Minister, or you wouldn't be going to the trouble of this creating this service. So who are the bad banks then, or who is creating the need for this service?
Well, look, it would be over 20 years that I have been working sometimes directly with farmers, sometimes indirectly. I know others who have. All of the banks have been like this. They, in summary, I guess, that they're bullies. They have all the power and they say what goes. And that's not a desirable situation. It's caused huge stress, and often, for farmers and their families, has been a very sad outcome. And we just want to bring some balance. They do this in Australia. The banks support it in Australia, and in fact, the banks are supporting this piece of legislation here because they actually, it's better for them to ensure that there's a fair process, not one driven by their local manager or by someone from head office.
So do you believe that some farmers are being bullied right now by banks?
Look, I think there's a bit of caution at the moment. There is a high level of debt, some uncertainty. There's probably always a situation where some farmer may think it's being unfair, but I think if we start to see more foreclosures for whatever reason, and we go through these little splurges from time to time, we're just, as a coalition government, we're wanting to have a fair situation for all parties, including the banks, and often that hasn't been the case.
So I'm just wondering, why are you creating this service for farmers? As you would appreciate, a number of small businesses fail. They're not being offered something like this. So why are you passing a law to provide mediation, binding mediation for farmers who fail to meet debt repayments?
I guess there have been enough cases over the years in the farming sector to say that we need to make some changes. The Australians went through and passed legislation to bring some fairness. I understand that, in some small business situations, similar situations may arise, and I guess that MPs and others may assist. This is for farmers. They are complex debt situations, complex financing situations. There are a lot of factors affecting farmers and their operations. It's a family situation more often than not, and often, when they have to move from the farm, that's it. They often have nowhere else to go. So it's just
so
where
what
we
are the
have
figures
such
for
an imbalance of
foreclosures?
power.
Yeah, so what are the figures for foreclosures? Because you're saying there's a need for this, and you're saying farmers, and there's a power imbalance there. So I'm just wanting to get a handle on how big this problem is as to why we need it. So in a given year, how many farmers are foreclosed on?
Look, I don't have the exact numbers, and they vary from year to year. It's low. It's probably 20 to 30. It's not a huge number, but the issue is, as a government, we're not going to stand by and let a situation that's clearly unfair. Farmers are, in a challenging environment. They are facing a climate day to day, changing prices, a whole lot of factors, and they are still, producing, $40+ billion worth of export earnings for us. So we need to encourage more young New Zealanders into farming, and, we're struggling to attract them, and partly it's because of the imbalance that they find themselves in when they have a huge debt, which is the capital requirement to go farming.
As part of this problem, though, people have joined industries when they are at their peak or when good money can be made, and the business that they've purchased or moved into is unsustainable. They haven't done their homework.
That may be the case, absolutely. And so we're not saying that those farmers who have made bad decisions, shouldn't, exit, but we're just ensuring that the process of exit is a fair one.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor. 3 elderly survivors of the Murchison earthquake were among the crowds gathered today to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the disaster. 17 people were killed when a magnitude 7.8 quake hit the town at the junction between Nelson and the West Coast. As the fallout from 1929 was remembered today, questions were also raised about preparations for the next big one. Our reporter Tracy Neal was at today's commemoration and filed this report.
The bell of St Paul's in the old gold rush town of Murchison tolled 17 times this morning. It marked the 17 lives lost in the quake. Ernie French was 4 years old when Murchison came crashing down around him. Tears welled as he recalled that day.
It goes back right to the beginning of my life.
Mr French says the family slept in the hay shed of the night of the quake that struck just after 10 in the morning.
It was safer there. The stock were being looked after, but word came through that we had to evacuate.
Mr French, now aged 94, was among about 280 people sent to Nelson. Most of the township was left homeless in the quake.
We walked off the farm down to what was called the cook place on the Buller, rode across the river, went in a dray across the Four River Plain, got to Murchison, stayed there a day or two, and then we were evacuated to Nelson.
Mr French is one of only 3 people still living who were in the Murchison quake. Eleanor Poynton and Isabel Monaghan, who were newborns at the time, were also at today's service, which began with a performance by the Murchison Area School Kapahaka group. Mrs Monaghan says today's service was one of many similar she has attended in Murchison over the years, but this one was special.
I'm a hospital patient at the moment and I'm on release today.
Mrs Monaghan says her only recollection is growing up in the shadow of the devastating quake and the effect on her mother.
I only recall the earthquakes, the minor little, and my mother would say, I'd say, oh, that's an earthquake, and Mum, oh, that's just minor.
The town's resident historian and a curator at the Murchison Museum, Judy Peacock, says the loss of 17 people in a town of 300 at the time runs deep today. She says 14 of those who died were killed by massive landslides. Many of the bodies have never been recovered. Christine Davies is the daughter of Doris White, who was rescued by her sister Gertie from a slip that buried their school.
June 17 could only be described as a normal morning with the fog down to its usual level, but strangely about 3 a.m. a slight earthquake was felt, and again at 7. This being more severe and was preceded by quite a large boom.
Mrs Davies said, reading from the family's record of events, that the children's mother hadn't wanted them to go to school that day. She felt disaster pending. The family record describes the quake as like being on a boat in a storm, and then the hills came down.
I yelled and we got to our feet and endeavoured to run back towards the building, but the slip overtook us and went straight through the school, leaving the roof perched on top. We were saved by some poplars and a chestnut tree.
Tasman District's Deputy Mayor Tim King says lessons from 1929 should never be forgotten. Mr King, who spoke at today's service, says it's a constant reminder of the need to always be prepared.
To know what to do if communication isn't as easy as it is normally in today's world. Things like having your food and water prepared. So my message is, given where we live and the likelihood of a number of different types of events interrupting our lives, that everyone should have a plan and be prepared.
He says recent natural disasters in Nelson, Tasman have proved that people are equipped to cope with future events, but the systems and processes we rely on perhaps aren't. In Murchison for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
And some time for your feedback before the 6 o'clock news. Shane has got in contact. This is about the interview with Sir John Key about David Hisco, the boss of ANZ, departing after problems with his expenses. And Shane says, what a joke. Another golden handshake in the boys' club really makes you feel great, knowing that most of us have to struggle so these entitled jokers can live the high life. So David Hisco is departing immediately. He's going to get 12 months' notice of pay, which is about $3 million. He doesn't have to pay back the expenses, but he does have to forfeit about $6.4 million worth of shares. And this person, Dave from Papakura, has said about David Hisco, really just confirms the perception of one rule for the big end of town and the rest of us. Karen has got in contact also and says John Key's responses to questions sounded very unconvincing, an exercise in not revealing anything of relevance. And many more of you have got in touch. This one from Jacqueline, masterful sashimi and saute of a slippery, stuttering Key. His Teflon coating has definitely gone. He sounded well out of practice as a PR performer, says Jacqueline. And Victoria says, listening to the story of yet another overpaid executive's greed and the former Prime Minister's glib, smug and evasive answers to the questioning, I'm reminded how much I don't miss him being at the helm of our nation. It certainly didn't sound like the chairman of the board disapproved of the deceit, more a case that the ANZ CEO was caught.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei ātaua tēnei. The ANZ Bank won't say whether its chief executive was forced to step down over a disagreement about his claim for personal expenses. It's been revealed today that David Hisco, who had been taking extended leave for what were described as health reasons, has now quit the bank altogether. In dispute are expenses amounting to tens of thousands of dollars for chauffeur-driven cars and wine storage. Sir John Key, who chairs the ANZ board, told Checkpoint Mr Hisco was characterising personal expenses as business ones for nearly the entire time he led the company.
He has set high standards for the bank. He's actually been an outstanding chief executive. He's done a great job over the last 9 years, but he's had a blind spot in regard to this area. And, you know, in the end, if we had a more junior person in the organisation who did this, we would also part ways.
The chair of ANZ Bank, Sir John Key. The Prime Minister says there's a successful model in Waikato of iwi and oranga tamariki working together with whānau who may be at risk of having a child uplifted, and she'd like to see similar arrangements in other regions. As another example of cooperation, Jacinda Ardern today also cited a meeting between government ministers, Ngati Kahungunu and the Māori Council in Hastings yesterday, where an internal inquiry into the attempted removal of a 6-day-old baby from Hawke's Bay Hospital was announced. Ms Ardern says 70% of the children who require state care are Māori, and oranga tamariki can't fix that on its own.
They're not perfect, but ultimately they're charged with keeping families safe, and we need to support them to do that, but we also need to bring in other partners, and that includes iwi to help them do that job.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. A Tolaga Bay farmer is hoping a forestry company's admission of guilt over storm debris will pave the way for compensation. Hikurangi Forest Farms has pleaded guilty to discharging contaminants into the environment in breach of its resource consent. It's one of 10 East Coast forestry companies being prosecuted by the Gisborne District Court since 2 storms left logs and other debris strewn over roads, farms and beaches a year ago, causing millions of dollars worth of damage. Mike Parker's farm was flooded when debris blocked a nearby river.
We would now expect the GDC to apply for compensation across both public and privately damaged assets. Farm fences, houses have all been flooded through, and then you've got bridges, beaches, the rivers. Now that Hikurangi have admitted to wrongdoing, they've now admitted liability.
Mike Parker. Hikurangi Forest Farms will be sentenced in October. The Health and Disability Commissioner has found poor care at an Auckland rest home probably contributed to an elderly woman's death. The woman died in 2016 after living at the Aria Park Retirement Village in Epsom for 6 years. Charlotte Cook reports.
In 2016, the woman had a fall, but her family wasn't told and no incident report was filled out. She fell a second time after 2 caregivers used the wrong equipment to transport her. A doctor recommended the woman go to hospital, but an ambulance wasn't called for 3 hours. It was later found she had a broken elbow, pelvic fractures, and an injured shoulder. When she returned to the rest home, staff failed to give her pain relief. She was eventually taken back to hospital where her condition deteriorated and she died. The Commissioner has recommended Aria Park apologise to the woman's family, use the report as a case study to teach staff, and report back in 3 months detailing what improvements it had made. This is Charlotte Cook.
Many hundreds of people are continuing to occupy streets in Hong Kong following a massive protest against a controversial extradition bill. The territory's government has suspended the bill, which allows the transfer of criminal suspects to mainland China. But protest leaders say it must be withdrawn completely. The BBC's Laura Westbrook reports.
I arrived just outside the Legislative Council quite early this morning, and there was still a lot of people who'd clearly been here all night. They were asleep, they woke up, and then they since have moved to the road next to the Legislative Council where they have gathered there. I have noticed that there is a police presence, but they are still keeping back. They're as of yet not interfering with people, and that was something that we really noticed on Sunday's march. Organisers said about 2 million people took to the streets. The police have queried that. They've said around 338,000 people, but in any case, there were a lot of people there.
Laura Westbrook reporting. The police are resuming the search for a person who went missing along with the boat they were aboard on a Southland lake last month. The boat was reported missing with 2 people on board on Lake Hauroko on May the 31st. A woman's body was found the next day. The search was suspended earlier this month because of unfavourable weather and lake conditions. Sergeant Ian Martin says 6 members of the Police National Dive Squad and 4 members of Invercargill Search and Rescue will resume searching the southern end of the lake tomorrow morning. The police believe the missing person is a Christchurch man in his 60s. Tasman District's Deputy Mayor says he's confident people are prepared for natural disasters, but he's not so sure about the systems and processes supposedly designed to protect them. The King, Tim King, was in Murchison for today's commemorative service, marking 90 years since a 7.8 earthquake killed 17 people and destroyed several homes. He says recent events in Nelson, Tasman were a good proving ground, but revealed some gaps.
And the recent fires, I think, highlight that people wanted to go back and start looking after themselves and their own properties. They were actually prevented by the system. So I have lots of faith in people, less faith in the system enabling them to do what they need to do.
Tasman District's Deputy Mayor Tim King. It's coming up to 6:30. The Blues are preparing for life without 2 of their most experienced midfielders, with Sonny Bill Williams and Ma'anonu both off contract after the Rugby World Cup in Japan. The Super Rugby season is over for the Auckland-based franchise, which finished 3rd from last and was the only New Zealand team to fail to make this weekend's playoffs. Leon McDonald concedes he's failed in his first season as head coach, and now they're likely to lose the experienced duo. He knows they'll have to recruit well.
We could be losing a lot of experience in the midfield, but we've got to get the right people in that midfield to help control the game with the 10s, and have some good game understanding, can play a good kicking game as well as a running game.
Meanwhile, the Webb Ellis Rugby World Cup trophy has been blessed by Shinto monks before being taken on a tour of Japan ahead of the tournament starting in September. The American golfer Gary Woodland has claimed his maiden major championship with a 3-shot win at the US Open at Pebble Beach. He drained a 7.5-metre birdie putt on the final hole to finish with a 3-under par 69 in the final round and 13-under for the tournament. The defending champion Brooks Koepka was second, 3 shots back. The NBA star Steven Adams has ruled himself out of New Zealand's Basketball World Cup campaign, continuing a mysterious career-long stance of being unavailable for the Tall Blacks. His management group has released a statement saying the Oklahoma City Thunder Centre won't be part of the tournament in China in September. Adams has never been available for international duty. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dana Johansson looks back at the weekend sport and maybe has a few predictions about the week ahead. We have a window on the world of the global food supply. Too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the right stuff. And photographer Penina Momoisia talks about her latest project capturing the splendour of Samoa's many churches on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, Coromandel Peninsula and Central High Country. A few showers gradually clearing from the south tomorrow morning. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairirapa, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Bay of Plenty this evening, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, mostly fine. Isolated showers about the Marlborough coast tomorrow. For Canterbury, mainly fine weather, scattered showers with hail retreating to Banks Peninsula this evening with snow to 700 metres. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, remaining showers north of Hokitika, clearing this evening and becoming fine everywhere. Otago and Southland, showers, some heavy with hail, snow to 400 metres, gradually lifting this evening and showers easing, becoming fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy, possibly thundery with hail, easing tomorrow afternoon. You're with RNZ National. It's coming up to 9.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A new advocacy group representing parents in dispute with Oranga Tamariki says it's been inundated with messages from hundreds of people asking for support. Set up just a month ago, Whānau First is now calling for an urgent Royal Commission of Inquiry into all aspects of the government agency. It comes amid growing public concern about the agency's practice of removing at-risk babies from their mothers. Amy Williams reports.
Oranga Tamariki is carrying out its own internal inquiry into the attempted uplift of a newborn baby from its mother at Hawke's Bay Hospital last month. The Children's Commissioner's Office will also review the agency's care and protection of Māori babies from birth to 3 months old. Now, Whānau First has launched an online petition calling for a full independent Royal Commission of Inquiry into the agency's practice of removing at-risk babies from their mothers. More than 4,500 people have signed the group's petition since it was launched just 4 days ago. Whānau First coordinator Louise Hutchinson says the culture of Oranga Tamariki and the way it operates needs to change immediately.
We need immediate change in the culture of how this agency operates, and it needs to shift its model of operation to a prevention-based model. That's our real key concerns, and we need to look seriously at the legislation.
Ms Hutchinson says many parents have told Whānau First they went to Oranga Tamariki because they thought the agency would help them, but now feel it has destroyed their lives. Caregivers have also spoken of their experiences. One told RNZ she has never encountered an organisation with less empathy that damages relationships more. The caregiver says sometimes all contact with foster children she and her husband care for is deliberately cut off, leaving the children with no continuity. She also says they were given no support to deal with the sudden removal of a girl they looked after for 9 months, despite asking to see her and trying to pass on a birthday gift. Ms Hutchinson says Whānau First has been inundated with people contacting them, including many who have lost hope in the system.
People are feeling really shut out, they feel voiceless, and they actually feel really intimidated by the whole process. When you look at the Act itself and you're dealing with laws and stuff, these people just have no idea what they're coming up against.
The Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, told RNZ nobody wants Oranga Tamariki to keep uplifting 3 Māori babies a week from their families. She says work is needed so families don't find themselves in a place where the children need to be taken into care, and efforts need to start earlier so Oranga Tamariki is not having to show up at the door. Crown and Māori Relations Minister Calvin Davis attended a meeting alongside Ms Martin, Ngāti Kahungunu and the Māori Council in Hastings yesterday. He says unconscious bias isn't limited to government agencies. It's in all parts of the community. Mr Davis says part of his job is to eliminate unconscious bias.
There's unconscious bias in all parts of the system, so not just the system, out in communities, and it's not limited to government agencies. And like I say, that's part of my role where it exists in government agencies, that we work to address it.
Whānau First's Louise Hutchinson says she expects the petition calling for a Royal Commission of Inquiry to attract thousands of signatures before the group presents it in person to the government. For Checkpoint, this is Amy Williams.
And the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says iwi and oranga tamariki working together with whānau, who may be at risk of having a child uplifted, has been a successful model in the Waikato. And she says she'd like to see similar arrangements rolled out in other regions. The meeting between government ministers, Ngāti Kahungunu and the Māori Council in Hastings yesterday, where an internal inquiry into the attempted removal of a six-year-old baby from Hawke's Bay Hospital was announced, is another example of iwi and oranga tamariki working together. Ms Ardern says 70% of children who require state care are Māori, and oranga tamariki can't fix that on its own.
The numbers tell us a story. Now, we're going through the process at the moment. It started under the last government of fundamentally changing the way that oranga tamariki are working. They are working much more collaboratively with iwi and trying to find solutions that try and prevent children from being removed from family, and if they are, placing them with wider family. But actually the investment in this organisation is ongoing, and the work that needs to be done is ongoing. They're not perfect, but ultimately they're charged with keeping families safe, and we need to support them to do that, but we also need to bring in other partners, and that includes iwi to help them do that job.
And that was the Prime Minister at her post-cabinet press conference, which was a short time ago. Overseas now, where it's early afternoon in Hong Kong and hundreds of protesters are still on the streets after a massive demonstration yesterday, the third in just a week. Organisers believe up to 2 million people turned out to protest against the government's handling of a controversial extradition bill. Now, the bill, which allows the transfer of criminal suspects to mainland China, has been suspended, but protest leaders say it must be withdrawn completely. And in a dramatic move, Joshua Wong, the pro-democracy leader of the 2014 Umbrella Movement protests, has been released from jail. And he wasted no time in wading into the latest political standoff, calling for the resignation of Carrie Lam, the current chief executive, over the extradition bill issue.
Millions of Hong Kong people joined the demonstration and protest within the past few weeks. It showed the spirit and dignity of Hong Kong people. What we ask for is such urge. Carrie Lam, the evil chief executive, should withdraw the extradition amendment. And what we try to do is just through civil disobedience and direct action, and let the whole world, let the international communities to realize that how Hong Kong people will not keep silence under the suppression of President Xi and the chief executive Carrie Lam. Carrie Lam must step down. Otherwise, I believe in the next few weeks, before the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong transfer of sovereignty, more and more Hong Kong people, not only 1 million or 2 million people, will come and join our fight until the day we get back our basic human rights and freedom.
Pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong speaking after his release from prison this afternoon. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, has apologised for her handling of the situation, but it hasn't been enough to dim the protesters' anger. CNN's Ivan Watson is in Hong Kong.
They came on foot, by subway, and on ferry boats by sea. People of Hong Kong, organisers claim close to 2 million, marching to make their voices heard. A massive protest against the city government, a day after it made a major concession, temporarily suspending passage of a controversial law that would allow extradition of suspects from this former British colony to mainland China.
The government's backed down, so why are you still out in the streets?
Well, I think majority of the people are still very angry about the police shooting and the excess violence that they've been using.
She's talking about the violent clashes that erupted Wednesday. Riot police using force to break up demonstrators who formed a human barricade around the city's legislative council. The clashes left dozens wounded.
What a difference a few days makes. Just a few days ago, the riot police were tear-gassing protesters, and now they're helping control traffic as the demonstrators march through.
In this test of wills between the leader of Hong Kong and the opposition in the streets, people power won for the moment. On Saturday, Chief Executive Carrie Lam pressed the pause button on the extradition law. But as this sea of humanity surged through the streets on Sunday, Beijing's hand-picked appointee finally said she was sorry, acknowledging in a written statement deficiencies that caused disappointment and grief. The chief executive apologized to the people of Hong Kong for this and pledged to adopt a most sincere and humble attitude. Through a twist of colonial history, Hong Kong is the freest city in modern-day China. Many here, like Raymond, Wendy, and Ryan Ho, fear for the future, the year 2047, when the city will lose its autonomy and fall fully under China's control.
Do you trust the Chinese central government?
No.
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 Why?
I think it's not a democracy. It's not full of democracy for the people or for the citizens.
And after the most dramatic week in years, look where Hong Kong is now. Protesters angry and emboldened in the streets, denouncing the city's leadership.
Ivan Watson with that report. It is almost 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The pay offers aimed at breaking the deadlock in the teachers' pay dispute have come as a kick in the guts for hundreds of primary school principals. They are dismayed the offers do nothing to stop the leaders of small primary schools being paid less than senior teachers at big schools. If the deals are accepted, teachers at the top of the pay scale could be earning $90,000 a year by 2021. And with management units of $4,000 each, they can easily earn more than the $95,000 being offered to new principals at the smallest schools. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
There are more than 300 principals at schools with 50 students or less, and the government's offering them 3 pay rises of 4.5% each. That will take their salaries to between $95,000 and just over $105,000 a year by 2021, depending on experience. Carolyn Hill at 23-student Wharepapa South School in the Waikato says the offer is gutting because teachers with management units will still be able to earn more than a principal.
I believe it's really unfair that a teacher with, small leadership units can be on more salary than I am when I feel like I have the ultimate responsibility. And, so it's kind of a real kick in the guts. To be fair, when they made the announcement, I sort of hoped there would be a bit more.
The possibility of senior teachers earning more than principals is not new. Carolyn Hill says 2 years ago she was earning more as a classroom teacher with 4 management units than she's earning now as a principal. But she had hoped that anomaly would be addressed, and now she worries it will become harder than ever to find principals to run small schools.
The thing that upsets me is that little schools like U1 and 2 schools, which have 50 or less than 100 students in it, they're going to be very hard to fill because of what teacher as a career path will go into principalship knowing that they're going to take a pay cut to become a principal and have the huge responsibility that we do.
Rosemary Hendrickser at Manawaru School near Te Aroha says when the offers were made public on Friday, it was clear principals are not looking at a good deal.
When I looked at what the principals were offered, it was almost like there was a page missing. It appeared that we were very much coming off second best, and then when the numbers started being tossed around where DPs were going to be earning more than the principals, it started to look a little bit more serious.
Rosemary Hendrickser says a lot of principals are unhappy and she hopes they refuse the government's offer.
When the rubber meets the road, I would hope that they don't, because it's really not okay, and given that it's not just for 12 months, it needs to have another look, because it's not sustainable to have principals earning less than the DP for the next 3 years.
Fetu Cormack from the Principals Federation says running a small school is a hard job and pay rates should be a lot better.
It is tough, and you're expected to be the teacher, you're expected to be the principal, and also to engage in a positive way with your communities. Principals of small schools are the backbone of our country, and they do an amazing job. So I think some acknowledgement needs to be made in that regard.
The Educational Institute says relativity between principals of small schools and senior staff in big schools is a long-standing issue. The union says it will be up to its members to decide if they approve or reject the offer. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
A fire at an Auckland panel beaters, which has destroyed part of the building, is thought to have started inside part of the workshop. Emergency services were called to Bodytech Panel and Paint on Harris Road in East Tamaki just before 1 this afternoon. Katie Scotcher reports.
Shane Neal, who works near the panel beaters, says he first learnt about the fire when he smelt burning plastic.
So I had a look outside to see what it was and walked down the driveway to see guys running around with fire extinguishers. So I ran inside and they opened the spray booth and the whole thing was just a big fireball.
Shane says it appears the fire started in the spray booth, a sealed unit used when painting cars.
And then it pretty much quickly spread out the top of it and caught the roof of the building on fire, which nobody could get to.
Shane and others ran inside the burning workshop to try and move customers' cars.
Couldn't really see a lot, but we were trying to clear a way so that they could get in with appliances and hoses and stuff. So whatever cars we could get out, we got out. And now they're obviously just dousing down hotspots now with the ladder truck.
Just before 1 this afternoon, 10 fire crews rushed to the East Tamaki scene to get the fire under control. Shane describes the damage to the workshop.
The whole building is pretty much gutted inside and whatever was left in there.
Natika Panu, who works at the beauty shop opposite the panel beaters, can clearly see the damage the fire has caused.
I can see a hole inside the workhouse, like where they have the fire. There's a hole in the roof.
There were no reports of injuries, but Natika says when the fire first broke out, they were worried about the gas canisters stored inside exploding.
We were worried about our health. Everybody was running around because it's all smoke and it's bad. They were evacuating all the people around because there was a chance of fire spreading, because it's a workshop where they have all sort of like gases and stuff for cars.
Fire crews are still at the scene, damping down hotspots. I Tamaki Makoto mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
Passionate Tonga Rugby League fans have gathered at Auckland's Mount Smart Stadium this afternoon ahead of their team's match against the Kiwis on Saturday. The team is currently ranked 4th in the world thanks to its consistent form since the historic victory against New Zealand at the 2017 World Cup. Now, we sent Alex Perrottet and cameraman Nick Munro to mingle with the fans and the players.
Loyal fans braved the rain at Mount Smart, streaming in with dreams of meeting their biggest heroes. And the stars of the future performed the Sipi Tau to get the team in the mood. Some of these players have come a long way to join the team, including Tui Lolohea, who's currently playing in the English Super League.
You've been carving up there in the Super League, so what are you looking forward to on the weekend?
Just looking to be back with the boys and hopefully go there and get a win.
Yeah, now you've done it before, beat them at the World Cup. What do you reckon is going to happen this weekend?
I'm pretty confident we can do the job again with the team we got. So
what do you need to be doing though?
Just run hard, tackle hard.
Former Australian and Tongan representative John Hopoate's son Will is in the squad, and John says the team has done more than prove itself.
The talent that's put their hand up to play for Tonga, maybe even foregoing a role with New Zealand or Australia. I mean, it's almost like would you say it's like kind of a state of origin type team and sort of talent you've got?
Yeah, well, it pretty much is, and we could play our origin series with New Zealand and Samoa. And imagine if Samoan boys went back to there, they'll be very strong as well. So, and that's what we're trying to do, build the international game to make it better, because no one wants to just watch New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain all the time. They want a bit of a competition.
It's not often that these fans get the chance to see their favourite players, but Tonga's rise in the world rankings has earned the team more games. It will be playing Great Britain in Waikato in October and Australia in November at Eden Park. But right now, everyone is focused on beating the Kiwis, including this league-crazed family who've named their youngest one MMT, after Mate Maatonga.
How are they going to go, do you reckon?
I think the Kiwis are going to get extinct this weekend, because they're an endangered species. So I think this weekend they're going to get extinct, brother. Sorry.
That kind of expectation resting heavily on all these large red shoulders, and perhaps most heavily on Captain Jason Taumalolo.
Yeah, you're not just a leader on the field, though. You were one of the first guys to put your hand up to say, no, I'm not playing for New Zealand, I'm going to play for Tonga. How do you feel now that so many other big names have put their hand up to stand alongside you and make Tonga the team that it is?
honoured, I guess, is probably one of the biggest words that come to mind. But I think for us, it's more than a footy game. It's about representing our heritage and obviously doing our country and our people proud. So the game on Saturday night will be a big occasion, not only for ourselves but country of Tonga.
But they'll have to do it without star player Michael Jennings, ruled out with injury. And they'll be sweating on this week's judiciary hearing for Andrew Fifita, who's fighting a dangerous contact charge. The New Zealand team has chosen its squad, featuring experienced stars Benji Marshall and Kieran Foran. But Tonga coach Christian Wolff says his players are ready for any challenge and can't wait for Saturday.
It's a big game for our blokes and they're very excited about it, and it's a big game for both teams. So I don't need to encourage them to go out with energy. I know that everyone's going to go out there some energy and everyone's going to want to rip into each other.
But today it's all about the fans, looking up to the heroes who hail from the small islands back home in Tonga. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And let's get to some of your feedback on the earlier interview with Sir John Key about David Hisco, the ANZ boss's departure over an expenses scandal. Reese has got in contact to say, "Hi Lisa, you need to understand management speak. Leaving for health reasons means pushed. So does to spend more time with family. However, leaving to pursue other opportunities means resigned before being pushed." Thanks for the translation, Reese. And Jeff Hampton says nothing like a sense of entitlement and having a play with other people's money when you're slumming it on $3 million a year. Thanks for your company. We will be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The head of ANZ Bank, David Hisco, will be paid out 1 year's notice after leaving over a disagreement about his claims for personal expenses. Jacinda Ardern says other partners such as iwi can support Oranga Tamariki in its work to keep families safe. The government says a new scheme to help struggling farmers will require lenders to offer mediation before putting farms into receivership. And a Tolaga Bay farmer is hoping other companies will follow Hikurangi Forest Farms in admitting guilt over the damage caused by last year's storm debris. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I think it manifested in a lack of responsibility by the state to engage with whānau appropriately.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Games like Halo that a lot of people would have fond